So, this will be my first review of a TTRPG. Let's hope this isn't bad. What will I be reviewing today? Well, you read the title, a superhero TTRPG, with expansion books that really ain't necessary. Mutants and Masterminds. A game produced and published by Green Ronin Publishing. Honestly, I've gotten into this recently, probably because I get to play at a comic book shop every week, and because my grandpa and uncles used to get me comic books for my birthdays and Christmas. My favorite ones being the second Blue Beetle, a man with no powers or money whatsoever. He MacGyvered his way out of situations. I had to look up how to spell that name for my script. Apparently they rebooted it in 2015, and I'm kinda glad I never heard of this. Either way, now, how does this system work? Well, it's very odd for a TTRPG player who's used to Pathfinder or Dungeons & Dragons, because this game has 0 classes and 0 levels, kind of. You have power points, which you can spend on abilities, gear, bases, vehicles, powers, more. The points spent on abilities and gear add up to your personal power level, making you more and more recognizable, but more and more of a threat as well. This game is very much not focused on combat, but instead on roleplay, which I very much like. It's definitely a game made with players in mind more than the game masters, though, I will say. The GM in this game is more of a narrator than anything else. You can throw things at your players, but yeah, the combat is a little lacking. Instead of HP, you're more trying to keep up and knock down your enemies. When combat is over, you may be rewarded with a number of things, from power points to spend to story progressions, such as, who were these jokers with the super shotguns? Why were they after your ally here with the mutant forearms, blazing eyes, and horns? Why did they refer to themselves as the guys? What is going on here? Honestly, maybe that's because I have 4 little sisters and grew up as a storyteller, but I love this sort of approach. Story first before all else. And the PowerPoint systems allows for extremely customizable options. Let's look through one of the 2 optional core rulebooks for this. Now, for players and game masters alike, I would recommend getting the Deluxe Heroes Handbook for 3rd edition's Mutants and Masterminds, as it clarifies a lot of things in the basic one and adds more on top of it. Once you have the Deluxe, the basic isn't absolutely necessary, but it's a nice thing to have to get a few more options. On page 143 of the Deluxe Heroes Handbook starts the chapter on powers. Right before that is skills. I'd recommend figuring out what powers you want, base your powers or your skills around that, and each power actually has a number of options in it of itself. For example, the flight ability. It costs 2 power points per rank and goes faster or farther with each ranks you add. You can spend more points to make it so the flight works underwater when you're knocked out, or make it so it's harder to notice that you started flying, which seems weird in hindsight. But normally you need to make like a Superman type of motion for it. Anywho, each of these make it cost a little more and more and more. The aquatic costs 1 point, the continuous 1 point, and subtle 1 or 2, the book says, depending on how many sub-abilities you take, yada yada. You can also take flaws to make it cost less, but you can't take so many flaws it reduces the base price of the ability. For example, flight flaws, concentration. You need the ability to focus on your flight in order to keep in the air, so you can't punch and zoom. This will lower the cost by 1 per rank of this you take. but you can't reduce it lower than the base price. There's also distracting, which makes it so you are a wide target for everyone around you. You can't be a very good flyer with it, though. Again, 1 per rank. Now we go into my favorite flaw for flight, and that's glider. Instead of flying, it's essentially just a slow fall thing, but it can only go so far, and then you just drop to the ground. There are some abilities you can use to mitigate that drop and, stop yourself from hurting, but it ain't a great glide, keep in mind. It's basically like those stupid little webbings Spider-Man had under his arms for a while. Everybody remembers that, and how everybody nowadays makes fun of it. No? Y'all don't remember that? No? Well, it's better than the spider buggy. No, seriously, look it up. They actually did a mini-comic just making fun of how Spider-Man in New York had a dune buggy for a bit. Of course, powers and abilities aren't the only things that are customizable. You're used to your looks being customizable in any TTRPG. You decide how you look. That's just how it goes when the game's based around imagination. But how you change into your super form, quote-unquote, is also very customizable. Do you have an alter ego who walks around normal asshole during the day? Or are they a vigilante that comes out secretly from a secret hideaway, yada yada? Do they jump into a phone booth, or do they spin around on the street like Wonder Woman? That's all up to you. Hell, you could even have it where everybody knows who you are and you don't have a secret disguise or an alter ego. You're just Dwayne from down the road who happens to be super strong and have stupid powers or whatever have you. All that's perfectly fine. It actually can play into the system as well. Like I said, you can spend your power points on bases and vehicles and such. Of course, what about running the game? What do you need and how does it play? Like I said, it's more of a story-based game rather than combat. There is combat, don't get me wrong. It's just a little bit open-ended, really. Game Master should definitely have the Deluxe Game Master's Guide along with the Deluxe Hero's Handbook as well. I'd recommend starting your players off at power level 10, which will give you 150 power points. But then we go into what exactly do you throw against your players. The book straight up says that measuring power level to power level isn't a good idea, because you will always have that one player that's either below everybody else or that other one that's ridiculously optimized. It's an inevitability. Though it does recommend having an enemy be 2 power levels above your players if you have a group of 4. Which sounds alright, but I haven't gotten to test this out yet, and I haven't talked with the guy that ran a game for me in a while, so I can't exactly remember how we went about it. Let's go back to the heroes for a minute. Now, maybe you don't really know how to make a hero, or maybe you just don't have enough time. Maybe you just want to play as your favorite comic book character. Well, there's some pre-created heroes for that, and even a quick start sort of thing where you can look through pre-selected options and choose from that. Do you want to play as Iron Man? Well, the battlesuit build is what you're looking for. Batman? Well, duh, we all want to be Batman. Crime fighter build. And who doesn't want to be the Martian from DC Comics? Take the Mimic for that. And there's a lot more options than just what I said here, from average soldier with a big gun to Superman to Wonder Woman. And all these build options are power level 10, which is a nice segue into the next section. Power levels are how you determine how strong your character is. However many power points you spend into your character personally is how powerful they are. There's also hideout options, but I still don't understand how that makes you a higher power level. but I recommend starting your players out at power level 10, as it gives a nice in-between of options and focus. Starting at level 1 is really limiting, and you won't be doing anything but stopping muggings at that point. But it could be nice starter for a big thing, like that one weeb show with the superhuman children and the blood drinker who suddenly controls storms. I don't know if that clarifies anything. You know what I'm talking about, since everyone abbreviates it and it confuses me, making me think it's a Monster Hunter game. But now let's go into what I built for my first superhero. I started with Origin. A random mutation gave him his powers from birth. What are his powers? 4 arms and intense strength. I gave no flaws on the arms, though there are options for that. I did need to spend extra for each limb, 1 point for one limb, another point for another limb, but where I did put flaws in was his strength. He couldn't completely control it, despite living with it all his life. His extra arms were just going to always go full blast, meaning he needed to constantly be working out in order to tire his body out and not hurt people accidentally. Another flaw I gave him was a personality flaw, though I don't think that actually changed his point spends at all. I made him incredibly uncontrolling of his emotions, specifically rage. He had an intense anger from people ostracizing him for having 4 arms, burning red eyes, horn growths coming out of his forehead and jaw, which leads nicely into his desire or goal or reason for being a superhero. He wanted to be accepted. He wants to make friends on a personal level. I made him an absolute Chad in the physical department, but in a mental capacity, he's like me. A small, angry man with Napoleonic syndrome. Anywho, back to the review. Mutants and Masterminds. It's a great RPG with lots of potential. It's got 1,000 ways to play and 1,000 types of games you can do. It's completely open and up to you and the game master. It's a great system you could theoretically play with just one book, but I do recommend getting the Deluxe Game Master's Guide for those who are looking to run the game. But don't be afraid to draw from shows, comics, books, and anywhere else when it comes to a game. It actually recommends a few just for inspiration. Of course, I do need to go into some negatives if I want to give an honest review of something. The books are rather vague. One of my normal players had asked me if there were caps for skills and abilities and save scores. I looked into the book and I could not find it anywhere. Maybe I was just on the wrong page or looking in the wrong chapter, but I ended up having to go to the internet in order to find it. Combat is also pretty vague as well. Like, you hit, but you have to pass or strike a certain DC in order to hit them. But then you also need to roll counter to it. So, say you're trying to hit a target. You roll close combat skill in order to hit them. They would then roll parry in order to block it. So, let's say you beat their parry check. Well, then you would roll damage, which is based off your strength score for that there. Then they would roll a resistance check. I can't remember exactly which check it is specifically, and I don't feel like pulling out the books just to look because my script is already done and I didn't write it down. If you pass, I think 10 plus their damage number, it would then mean you ignore the damage? I think... I'm not 100% sure. But your whole goal isn't to actually kill the villain, but instead incapacitate. And there is death, but it's... I had to hunt it down in 2 different books to find it. And in the one book it's in, I had to hunt through 3 chapters in it. But all in all, giving this system a score, I'd give it a 75% more or less. It's a bit hard to navigate the books, and the combat system is a little bit open. I know I gave some basic descriptions on combat there, but I'm still not 100% sure I'm actually doing it right. For all I know, I could be 1,000% wrong. But that's about it. That's my take on Mutants and Masterminds. I'd actually recommend it if you like comic books or superhero movies or TV shows. But now all I got to say is shove off.